Wyoming Territory, October 1879. The wind cut hard across the open plain, and by the time night settled on the edge of the Bighorn Mountains, the sky was bruised purple and gold. Yates Dorsey sat on the porch of the homestead with a rifle across his lap, boots planted firm on the steps, watching the quiet land stretch into shadows. It had been 2 years since he buried his father and took over the place. 2 years of dry summers, bad cattle prices, and silence so thick it felt like it grew between the walls. He had grown used to that silence. It suited him. Until the knock came, 3 sharp raps on the door behind him. He stood, rifle still in hand, and opened it slow. The woman on the other side looked like she had run from hell. Her dark hair was wind-tangled, her dress torn at the hem, and her eyes were wide and locked on his like she was not sure if she was still breathing. "Please," she said. "I need help." Yates stepped back without a word, letting her in. The firelight from the hearth caught her face, dust streaked across one cheek, a bruise blooming along her jaw. She clutched a boy in her arms, no older than 6, wrapped tight in a wool coat too big for him. Another child, a girl maybe 4, held onto her skirt, silent and blinking. "I am Nella Vance," she said, voice low. "And these are my children, Clara and Caleb. We were abandoned out near Red Fork 2 nights ago. My husband left us." Yates shut the door behind them and bolted it. "Sit down," he said, nodding toward the hearth. "You are safe now." She hesitated, then lowered herself to the floor near the fire, pulling the children close. They did not cry. They just leaned into her, tired, cold, and small. Yates moved to the kitchen and filled a tin cup with water, handing it to her. She took it with a trembling hand. "I do not know where else to go," Nella said softly. "I kept walking until the sun went down, then I saw the smoke from your chimney." "Lucky you saw it," Yates said. "Folk do not come by often." He crouched down in front of the boy, who stared up at him with wary brown eyes. "You hungry, Caleb?" The child nodded once. Yates stood and started cutting slices of cornbread from the tin on the counter, scooping stew into bowls. He set them in front of Nella and the children one by one, careful not to crowd them, not to speak too much. The girl, Clara, gave the faintest smile when he tucked a blanket around her shoulders. They ate quiet. Nella's hands shook when she lifted the spoon, but she kept her back straight, her chin high. Yates saw the way she glanced toward the window, toward the door, like she still expected something worse to come through it. "Your husband," he said. "He leave you out there on purpose?" Nella looked up at him, and her eyes were sharp now, steady. "He said he was meeting a man to trade our wagon for a mule, told me to wait by the creek. He never came back." Yates nodded once. "You are not going back to find him?" "No," she said. "I am not." That night, he made up the bed in his father's old room and gave it to Nella and her children. He slept by the fire with his rifle beside him, listening to the wind scrape across the boards, wondering what kind of man left his wife and children in the wilderness to die. In the morning, the children were already up when he stepped into the kitchen, sitting at the table with warm bread in their hands. Nella was by the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stirring a pot like she had done it 100 times. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "I could not sit still." "I do not mind." He watched her for a moment, the way her shoulders moved, the curve of her neck, the steadiness in her hands now that they had slept under a roof. She looked different already, less like a woman on the run, more like one who belonged somewhere. Yates took his coffee out to the porch, boots crunching softly against the frost-dusted ground. The sun was barely up, casting gold across the grassland. He sat down, letting the warmth of the tin cup settle in his hands. A moment later, the door clicked open behind him. Nella stepped out, arms crossed against the morning chill. She sank down onto the step beside him. "I do not know what to do next," she said. "You do not have to know yet." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the kind that did not press down but stretched out easy between them. The children's voices drifted faintly through the open door, soft and high. "You do not say much," Nella said. Yates took a sip of coffee. "Never saw the use in words if there is nothing to say." She smiled faintly. "I used to talk too much. My mother said I was born with stories in my mouth." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the tiredness still there, the old hurt behind her eyes, but there was strength too, a quiet kind, the kind that survived cold nights and cruel men. "You can stay," he said, "as long as you need. I have room and work if you want it." Nella turned her face toward the horizon. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." She was quiet for a long beat, then nodded. "All right." And just like that, something shifted, not loud, not sudden, but real. That night, Yates stood on the porch again with his rifle and watched the land fall into darkness. He had guarded the homestead 1,000 times before, but it had never felt like it mattered much. Now, with Nella and her children asleep inside, it felt different, like something worth protecting. Like home, by late October, the days folded into one another with a quiet steadiness. The mornings were colder now, and frost clung to the grass like fine lace. The children helped Nella gather kindling from the tree line, while Yates split logs with the blunt rhythm of someone used to labor without pause or praise. They fell into a rhythm that asked for no explanation. Nella mended what needed mending. Caleb fed the hens under her watch. Clara followed Yates to the barn one morning, her small hand wrapped tight around the handle of a dented tin pail. She watched him curry the mare with a seriousness that made him hand her the brush without a word. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the cottonwoods, Nella came through the barn door with a basket under one arm. Her sleeves were rolled again, and her hair was pinned back in a way that kept it from her face, but softened the edges around her eyes. "I found your mother's preserves," she said, setting the basket on a crate beside the tack wall. "Peach, mostly. The jars were tucked behind a flour sack in the root cellar." "I had forgotten them," Yates said. "She put up too many one year and called it a debt to the trees. She must have had good hands." Nella ran her fingers along the rim of one jar, the wax seal still firm. "This is clean work." "She was good at most things," he said. Didn't say much, but she knew how to keep a house steady. Nella didn't look up. "I think about steadiness a lot lately." Yates leaned against the stall post, watching her study the jar's label. Her voice had a different weight to it now, not as guarded, but not light either. Like someone measuring their footing before stepping onto a frozen stream. "I used to think I had it," she went on. "I thought if I kept the children clean and the meals warm and didn't raise my voice too often, that would be enough." He offered no reply. She didn't seem to expect one. "I was wrong about a lot of things," she said, finally meeting his gaze. "Maybe," Yates said, "but you're still here, that counts for something." Nella looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll fix biscuits in the morning. We'll need them if we're to get through that pile of corn." She left the barn without another word, the hem of her skirt brushing soft against the hay-strewn floor. That night the air turned sharp. A coyote's cry broke across the prairie just after dark, long and low. Yates sat by the hearth with the rifle still propped beside him, oiling the stock with slow, careful strokes. Nella sat in the rocker across from him, a patch of cloth in her lap. She stitched in silence, her needle rising and falling in even rhythm. The fire cast a soft glow across her profile. She had changed out of her day dress and into a flannel one he hadn't seen before, a faded blue, buttons mismatched near the collar. It made her look younger somehow, or maybe just less worn. "Caleb asked if we were staying," she said, eyes still on the cloth in her hands. "I told him we'd see." Yates set the oiled rag down. "You're welcome, as long as you want." "I know," she said, "but I don't want to take more than I give." "You already don't." She looked up then. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer right away. The wind moaned against the eaves, and the fire cracked softly between them. "Because you came to my door and didn't ask for anything more than shelter," he said. "And because when a man sees someone trying to hold their family together with threadbare hands, he either stands up or he doesn't." Nella's expression shifted, but she didn't speak. She folded the cloth in her lap and laid it on the table beside her. The firelight caught the threads of a child's shirt, half finished. "I'm not used to men who mean what they say," she said quietly. "Then you've been around too many wrong ones." She rose and crossed the room, her footsteps soft against the plank floor. She didn't touch him, didn't sit close. Just stood by the window and looked out at the dark. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll show Clara how to boil lye soap. I think she's ready to try." Yates nodded once. "She's a quick one." "She is," Nella said. "So is Caleb." He just hides it different. He watched her standing there, her silhouette outlined against the moonlit pane. Everything about her was different now from that first night, her voice, her stance, even the way she held still. But the thing that struck him most was the absence of fear in her posture. She turned back toward the hearth and paused. "Will you ever leave this place? I thought about it once," he said, "but I buried too much here." Nella didn't press. She only said, "I understand," and returned to the rocker. Later, when the fire burned low and the house was quiet, Yates stepped out onto the porch. The stars above the ridgeline were clear and close enough to touch. He stood a while with his arms crossed, listening to the stillness. Behind him, the door creaked open. Nella stepped out, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Too quiet, you'll get used to it." She stood beside him, not speaking. Her breath came in soft puffs, rising like smoke into the cold. "Yates," she said after a while. "Yeah, thank you. Not just for the roof, for seeing us." He turned his head. Her face was tilted up toward the sky, eyes half closed. "You're not hard to see, Nella," he said. "You just needed somewhere to stop running." She looked at him then, not with surprise, but something quieter. Like maybe she was starting to believe him. They stood together until the cold chased them back inside. Neither spoke again that night, but something had changed. Not spoken aloud, not named, still it was there. As sure as the frost that would melt by morning. The first snow came soft and early, a dusting that settled overnight and clung to fence rails and bare branches like it had been waiting for permission. Yates stood by the barn door at dawn, watching white gather along the ridge. The cold had teeth now, sharp enough to make men tighten their coats and look to their roofs. Inside, the warmth from the stove had already drawn Nella and the children to the kitchen. She was kneading dough, sleeves rolled, her knuckles dusted in flour. Clara sat on a stool near the table, humming low with her chin resting in her hands. Caleb had started sorting dried beans by color, his tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth in concentration. Yates stepped in, brushing snow from his hair. Nella glanced up, then turned back to the dough. "You'll want to check the north eaves soon," she said. "I heard dripping last night. I'll go up after breakfast," he said, hanging his coat. "You ever climbed a ladder?" "Only when there was no one else to do it. I won't make you. You wouldn't have to." Their eyes met across the table. She didn't look away first. After breakfast, Yates took the ladder from the barn and climbed to the roof, boots steady against the rungs. He heard Nella humming below as she raked leaves into a pile near the shed, her rhythm slow but sure. The children carried handfuls of straw to the chicken coop, dropping more than they kept, but laughing the whole time. By midday, the clouds had thinned. Nella came to the barn carrying a folded piece of paper she'd found tucked between the pages of an old ledger. "I think it's a supply list," she said, handing it to him. "Your father's handwriting." Yates studied the lines: salt, flour, gunpowder, lantern oil, all marked with small ticks. "He made tallies for everything," he said. "Didn't trust his memory. Do you?" "I trust the work to keep me sharp." She leaned against the stall wall, arms crossed. "You ever think about adding to this place?" "What do you mean?" "Another room. A proper root cellar, maybe a smokehouse." He met her gaze. "You thinking long term?" "I'm thinking practical," she said, then softer, "but yes, maybe more than that." He rested the list on the workbench. "Then we'll need lumber." "I can sew curtains," she offered. "And Caleb's old enough to help set bricks if we lay the hearth right." Yates studied her face, the way she said "we" without hesitation. "You ever built anything from the ground up?" "Only myself." He stepped closer. "That's the harder thing." Instead of answering, she reached for a coil of rope on the post and began winding it with practiced ease. That evening, when the sky turned copper and gray above the ridge, they sat on the porch steps while Clara traced patterns in the frost with a pine twig. Caleb leaned against Nella's side, drowsy from the cold. "Your father," she said, "did he ever leave this land?" "Once. Went as far as Cheyenne, said it was too loud and too full of men who lied with their hats on." She smiled faintly. "He sounds like someone who'd have scared my husband half to death." Yates didn't ask about that man. He didn't need to. "You think the children will stay happy here?" she asked instead. "They look like they've forgotten what fear tastes like." That's not something I ever thought they'd forget. You gave them the space to. Nella looked down at Caleb, his fingers curled in the fabric of her skirt. I want them to grow up learning how to build instead of how to leave. They will. The last light rimmed her face in gold. Yates could see the beginnings of rest in her features, not ease, not yet, but the shape of peace taking hold. He reached for her hand. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. Her fingers slipped into his like it had been waiting to happen for weeks. I don't need promises, she said. I won't give what I can't keep, he answered, but I'm here, that's steady. She looked at their joined hands, then at him. That might be enough. Behind them, the door creaked open. Clara poked her head out, cheeks pink. Mama, can we sleep near the fire tonight? Nella stood, brushing her skirt smooth. Yes, love, go fetch the quilts. As the girl darted back inside, Yates rose beside Nella. I'll bring in more wood, he said. She touched his arm lightly. I'll help. They moved together toward the woodshed, no need for words. The snow was falling again, slow and quiet, covering the prints they'd left that morning. The first week of November brought deeper cold and a wind that pressed in from the north, sharp and constant. It carried the smell of pine and snowmelt, and Yates could feel it in his knees when he rose each morning. The land had turned quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet that haunted the place before Nella and her children arrived. This quiet had life beneath it, small sounds from the loft where Clara whispered to Caleb at night, the thud of Nella's boots when she crossed the porch in the dark, the scrape of a broom on the kitchen floor before dawn. They'd spent the last 2 days clearing the shed to make room for the extra sacks of barley Nella had bartered from a passing ranch hand in exchange for 2 jars of peach preserves and a pair of patched gloves. She'd taken the deal without hesitation, and Yates hadn't argued. She had a good eye for what they'd need, and no fear of making her voice known when it counted. That morning, she came in from the smokehouse with a basket of salted meat and a long gash across her palm. Caught it on a nail, she said, setting the basket down and wrapping the bleeding hand in her apron. Yates crossed the room, pulling a clean cloth from a drawer and meeting her eyes without fuss. Sit, she did, watching him kneel beside her and press the cloth firm to the cut. You'll need it stitched, he said. She looked down at the wound, lips pressed thin. You know how, he nodded. Learned on mules who kicked more than you will. She gave a short, dry laugh, then held still as he worked. The thread bit through her skin, and she didn't make a sound until the last pass. I used to watch my mother sew buttons with a thimble on every finger, she said. Said she didn't trust the cloth not to fight her. Yates tied off the stitch and wiped the blood from her wrist. You take after her, in some ways. She never stayed put, though, always looking past the fences. He secured the bandage and rose. And you? I stopped looking when Clara was born. She flexed her fingers, testing the binding. Didn't seem right to chase things with a baby on my hip. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. You still think about leaving? She didn't answer right away. Not like before. It used to come over me like a fever, needing to walk just to keep from breaking. But here. It's different. Yates leaned against the edge of the table. Because of the land, because of how you stand on it, she said, meeting his gaze. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters once, then settled. The children's voices echoed from the barn, mixed with the clatter of buckets. That night, after the chores were done and the stew had cooled in their bowls, Nella reached into the cupboard and pulled a tin of tea she hadn't touched since arriving. She filled 2 cups and set one in front of Yates at the table. Found this in the bottom of my bag, she said. Didn't think it'd last the trip. He took a sip, the taste bitter and sharp. Not what I expected. It's from Arkansas. My uncle sent it once. Said it was strong enough to wake the dead and cheap enough to give to the living. He nodded, setting the cup down. Your people still back there? No, most scattered after the war, few graves left behind, but not much else. She didn't say more, but her gaze drifted toward the fire and Yates didn't interrupt. After the children had gone to bed, Nella stayed at the table, her chair drawn close to his. They sat in the quiet, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and the faint bite of tea. I used to dream about stillness, she said, voice low. A place where I didn't have to look over my shoulder or keep my shoes by the door. You got that now, he said, I know. But sometimes I walk the fence line just to believe it's real." He reached across the table, his hand closing gently over hers bandaged, rough, warm. "It's real," he said. She gave a small nod but didn't pull away. Later, when the fire had gone to embers and the windows had fogged with cold, he stood at the door with the rifle in his hand. The porch creaked beneath his boots, and the stars overhead blinked through a haze of frost. Nella stepped beside him, her shawl drawn tight across her shoulders. "You always stand out here, most nights. Do you sleep at all, when there's nothing left to watch for?" She looked out across the dark field, the fence posts stretching toward the ridge. "I want to build something here," she said, "not just stay. Not just survive." He turned to her, slow and sure. "Then we build." She didn't smile, didn't speak again, but she reached for his hand, and this time she didn't let go. The snow deepened in the last weeks of November, blanketing the land without apology. It softened the fence lines and swallowed the path to the creek until only memory could tell you where to step. Inside the house, warmth hummed low and steady from the hearth, and the smell of boiled apples clung to the air. Nella sat sewing patches into the knees of Caleb's trousers, while Clara read aloud from the only book Yates owned that wasn't about farming or firearms, a weather-worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress his mother used to keep by her bedside. The girl stumbled over the words but didn't ask for help. She preferred solving them on her own. Yates leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the quiet unfold. He hadn't meant to come in yet. There was still a broken strap on the sled that needed mending, but something about the sound of Clara's voice held him there. When Nella looked up, her smile barely lifted the corner of her mouth. "You're letting the cold in." He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "You're letting the boy wear holes through his knees. He climbs everything that doesn't move. I wouldn't be surprised if I find him on the roof come spring." Caleb looked up from the corner where he sat carving a stub of wood with a butter knife. "I wouldn't fall." "You'd better not," Yates said. "Snow's not deep enough to catch you yet." Nella threaded her needle again, fingers moving with quiet precision. "He keeps asking when we're going to build that extra room." Yates pulled a chair from the table and sat beside her, after the thaw. "I already marked the trees we'll fell once the ground softens." She nodded, then tucked the finished trousers onto the pile beside her. "He wants it to be his and Clara's. Says he doesn't need anything fancy, just a window that opens." "I can give him that. You already have." He looked at her then, her profile lit gold by firelight, and felt something shift deeper than before, not sudden but sure, like snow settling into its final shape. Later, after the children had gone to bed and the fire had burned low again, Nella brought out a tin box from beneath the floorboard near her cot. She hadn't touched it since the night she arrived. "It was my mother's," she said, setting it on the table between them. "I kept it for the sewing needles, but there's more in it than that." Yates lifted the lid carefully. Inside were a handful of brass buttons, a cracked ivory comb, and a folded piece of paper that had yellowed at the corners. He didn't touch the paper. "She used to tuck pieces of her life away," Nella said. "Said the world had a habit of taking things if you didn't keep them close. Did you ever read it?" "Once. It's a letter from my father. He died at Shiloh." He nodded, not asking more. "I don't know why I kept it," she said. "It doesn't say much, just that he loved her and that he'd come home if he could. You don't need reasons to keep what matters." She turned her face toward him, eyes steady. "Do you keep anything?" "My father's knife. A rusted spur from the first horse I broke." "Nothing with words. Then you've kept your life in pieces too." He reached across the table and set his hand over hers. "I'd like to keep something whole now," he said. Nella didn't speak. Her thumb brushed lightly along the edge of his palm. That night, she didn't go back to the cot in the corner. She stayed by the fire, her head resting against Yates's shoulder, her breathing slow and even. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let the silence hold them like a promise. December came hard. Ice crusted over every trough, and the wind howled through the eaves like it was mourning something. But inside, the house grew richer with small comforts. Clara embroidered a square of linen for the table, and Caleb built a toy cart from scraps of wood and nails too bent to use for anything else. Yates spent his days felling deadfall from the southern edge of the property, dragging logs to the sled Nella helped repair. She met him at the halfway point each afternoon with coffee in a tin pail and 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth. They didn't speak much in those hours, but when their hands met on the handles or their sleeves brushed, it was enough. The connection had grown sturdy, not needing to be named anymore. One morning, just a week before Christmas, Yates rose early and found Nella already up, standing by the window in her shawl. "I want to marry you," she said without turning. He didn't answer right away. He stepped beside her and looked out at the snowy ridge, the pale light just beginning to lift across the horizon. "We could go to town," she said. "Find a preacher. I'd want it to be simple." He nodded. "I was going to ask you." Just hadn't found the right morning. She smiled then and turned to face him. "This one's good enough for me." They were married 2 days later, under a sky so clear it felt like it had been scrubbed clean. The preacher wore a coat too thin for the cold and stood on the porch with his book open in gloved hands. Clara and Caleb watched from the doorway, bundled in scarves Nella had knitted from leftover wool. Yates didn't say much. He didn't need to. When he lifted Nella's hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, the wind paused, just for a breath. Her smile was small and certain. That night, they sat by the fire with the children asleep behind the curtain that marked off their corner of the room. Nella leaned into Yates's chest, her legs tucked beneath her, eyes half closed. "I used to think I'd never belong anywhere," she said. "You do now, I know." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and slow. Inside, their hands stayed twined, their future unfolding without fear. Years later, the room was built. The children grew tall under the same roof, their laughter echoing through the trees and across the fields. Clara learned to read without stumbling. Caleb took to carpentry, his fingers precise and strong. Nella planted herbs by the porch, her garden neat and humming with bees come spring. Yates cut fence posts with Caleb and drank coffee by the fire each morning with Nella still wrapped in her shawl, her hair streaked with silver. They never left the land. They didn't need to. They had built something with no words wasted, no promises broken. A home shaped by quiet days and steady hands, and love earned, kept, and carried forward like warmth through the snow.